bridge building. Some of my members go to his church, and some of his members come to my church, which leads us to where we are today, our 17th community forum, which we do twice a year, one in February and then one is in August. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over now for our prayer from Pastor John.
If you would join your hearts with me in prayer. Almighty God, we give you thanks for this day, for the blessings you have bestowed upon us throughout it, and for the ministry that you have called us to as the hours have passed by. We thank you for your creativity, and you lead us into places that we hadn't thought of before. We thank you for the loved ones that surround us, the parts of our family, the members of our congregations, and the members of this community. We pray that we might be drawn together closer through your Spirit in our ministries, in our friendships, and in the community that this wonderful place truly wishes to be. We ask you to bless each of our families. We ask you to look within our hearts and see the prayers that we have there for the folks for whom we have concern, and for those that we are worried about, for those who are hurting. We ask your Spirit to come to them in gentle, loving ways. Be with this community in its struggles. Be with this community in its hopes. Help us see that in your Son, Jesus Christ, and through the gift of the Holy Spirit, we can be formed anew every day. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
So, good evening, everyone, and again, thank you all for coming out. Obviously, there's so many other things that you could be doing, and we're grateful that you decided to come here. I'm truly humbled and grateful also to be asked to be a part of this event once more. And Dr. Whitley already opened up and told you to give yourselves a round of applause, but I would like for you to do that again. Just give yourselves a round of applause for coming out to be a part of this. Because when we say 8 years and now 17th Forum, that speaks volumes about the commitment to what Pastor Chuck and Dr. Whitley started, and the fact that you're still with them as well speaks volume about your heart to serve and to live together and bring everyone together. And so I'm here to help moderate and be a panelist, and again, I say thank you for allowing me to be here. We'll start with introductions if you're not familiar with who our panel is, and I'll start with Pastor Chuck. Pastor Chuck Wilson of Matthews United Methodist Church. We thank you. Also, Pastor Luke Mabry, Senior Pastor at Matthews Presbyterian Church. Pastor Larry Whitley, Senior Pastor at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist. And then Pastor John Maritson, the Senior Pastor of Morning Star Lutheran Church. So I work in media. I've been in media in the city, in this town, and I'm a native of Cornelius, the Lake Norman area, and I've had the privilege to meet so many people. I've been doing this for a really long time, like over 30 years. The kids would call me an OG at this point. And I kind of take it with a compliment because I really thank God for maintaining and sustaining me and having an opportunity to get out and get involved in the community. And as we are dealing with what we're dealing with today, I've got some questions, first of all, to share that I'll present to the panel. But what really excites me about being here is I had shared with Pastor Whitley that there are more churches and ministries now starting to get involved and have conversations. Because one of the questions that has come up quite often is, when the church is silent, is it really silent? And the fact that the church is silent, it really is putting a statement out. Kind of like if you don't vote, then you really are casting a vote. And so Pastor Crimmins, who is in Charlotte as one of the churches there, he kind of made that statement and put it out around something that's happening as we are dealing with the climate that we are dealing with right now. So I'm really grateful that this panel is having these conversations. And I want to start with Pastor Whitley, since you're closest to me, with the first question, is if you could kind of share about Mount Moriah, talk about the church as well as your ministry, and tell us a little bit about you as well.
Thank you so much. As I've already stated, I'm Pastor Whitley. I'm on my 28th year as pastor here. It's been a great 28 years. Certainly, we started off in very humble beginnings in 19, 1997 over in the building next to us, which right now is our fellowship hall before this building was built. We started off with $250 in the bank. Yeah, I did say that right, $250 and 62 members. It was funny when they asked what kind of salary was I looking for. And I immediately told her, I said, we'll talk about salary when y'all get some money. And so we began to build. We remodeled totally this place over here. But Mount Moriah was first organized in December the 27th, 1879, under the leadership of Reverend Henry Boyd, which is the great-grandfather to Harvey Boyd. He was the first pastor of Mount Moriah. And we started the church on an arbor bush in the cemetery. If you look at the cemetery, wasn't there then, but there's 2 trees on the far corner. It's where they started the church. And also, we were able to purchase some land from Mr. and Mrs. J.S. Gribble. I don't know if that name sounds familiar with you. But we bought an acre of land for $15. Don't wish we all would have bought a lot of land back then. But Mr. Gribble helped us, and we were able to erect our first building down by these 2 trees in 1880. And we were able to, we were able to sustain our congregation through World War I, Korean War, and the Great Depression. It must have been World War II. They had 11 pastors before me, and Pastor Robinson, J.C. Robinson, came here at 26 years old, May of 1945, and he stayed here for 49 years before his health caused him to step away. So that's the history of Mount Moriah. We are 14 years into this building, and we are very blessed that God has given us an opportunity to move from over there to over here. But God is truly, truly good to us, and we certainly thank you. And our door is always open to everyone to come and worship with us. Thank you so much.
You didn't say anything about you. I mean, you've, all of the things, you were 30-year state trooper and all that kind of stuff.
Well, since you brought it up, Chuck. Yeah, my first career was with the Highway Patrol, North Carolina State Highway Patrol. I started off in Greensboro and was transferred to Waysboro for 13 years and got promoted, moved to Charlotte as a sergeant. I made first sergeant in Charlotte, made lieutenant in Monroe for 2 years, and retired a captain out of Salisbury, one of the first 3 black captains in the state of North Carolina. When I came on the Highway Patrol, I was the 18th black person that was hired, 18th in 1975. So I did 30 years with that and retired. But I worked 2 years as a lieutenant when I was called pastor here. So for 2 years I was pastoring and lieutenant, and I was wore out. They go to Highway Patrol during the day and then come here and try to catch up. But nevertheless, we did it. And so I served on the town board for 8 years. Got on the board and I was elected in 2015, served for 8 years, and I was the first person of color in 136 years. That still blows my mind when I say that, 136 years before you had any representation for people of color. But nevertheless, we had a wonderful time, and I enjoyed that so much. Did I miss anything, Chuck?
Thank you so much, Pastor Whitley. We'll now hear from Pastor John Maritson, Senior Pastor, Morning Star Lutheran Church.
Morning Star is the far-flung neighbor as far as the Matthews churches are concerned. We're up on Idlewild Road. If you go up to the traffic circle there on Idlewild and 51 and head towards Charlotte, you can get confused because there's a Morning Star Presbyterian church. They stole our name back in the 90s. And then our small little white church been here since 1905. But that was our third church, our third worship building in 1905. Morning Star has been together since 1775. We celebrate 250 years this year. And we're very glad about that. Our congregation is down a little bit further on Idlewild Road. We've got Idlewild Baptist Church, and then we've got Morning Star Lutheran there on the north side of Idlewild Road. A lot of changes. I've been serving that congregation since 1999. When we got there, I did not have a gray beard. I had a little more hair on my head. I had a preschooler and an 8-week-old child, along with my wife, of course. And now the kids are both 4 years out of college. And so we've seen them grow all the way through. And as Charlotte has changed and grown and had folks move into the area, Morning Star has grown. We've had, buildings and mortgages and paid off and mortgages and buildings, and we've done a lot of good growth, and that's been wonderful to experience. But I would say that the real blessing has been for me that Morning Star has really begun to focus more and more on its mission to the community around us. And that's been exciting, I think, not only for the community with whom we connect, but it also is exciting for the Morning Star folks because I feel like they don't just show up on Sunday and then go home and it doesn't make much of a difference. But when you can feel like your congregation is a part of something good and is a part of something positive, it continues to build a wonderful spirit. So I did not have a former profession. I came out of college and went to seminary up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I was going to be, when I was in university, I was going to work for the government, and I was going to be a spy. I was a Russian studies major, because this was in the 80s, and so, of course, Cold War was going quite well, and I'd had a number of years of Russian language, and so I actually spent my third year of college in the Soviet Union in what is now St. Petersburg. It was Leningrad at the time, and was going to do that. Graduated college, Soviet Union fell apart. I guess that's God's way of saying you're going to be a pastor. So we just did that, and we went to seminary together, my wife and I, and we ended up at Morning Star in '99. So that's been a neat progression for us. But I will say this, for being 250 years old now, our first full-time pastor was 1955. They were served by circuit riders out of Salt. Lutherans have a large Germanic, background, and old wagon road came out of Pennsylvania, came down the Shenandoah Valley, and you came down to Charlotte, kind of Salisbury in the Charlotte area, or you went down to South Carolina like Greenville. And that's why there's a lot of Lutherans down in that part of the world, because that's the German folks came down, made their stops. And so we were served out of Salisbury, because up until about 1950, Salisbury was bigger than Charlotte. If that tells you anything at all. Monroe was bigger than Charlotte at the same time. So glad to be with you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Maritson. One question. You speak Russian?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Меня зовут Жан Иван. Я жил в Ленинграде 30 лет назад, когда я был студент в университете. Я был студент университет имени Герцена, педагогический институт. So you can translate that on Google Translate. But that's basically what I told you. 30 years ago, I lived in Leningrad.
That's quite impressive. Very good, very good. We'll now hear from Pastor Chuck Wilson, Senior Pastor of Matthews United Methodist Church.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I'll begin with me. I want you all to know that I grew up under the deep influence of racism. My parents were academics. My dad was a professor. My mother was a librarian. But I grew up early years in L.A. That would be Lower Alabama. Okay? I was born in Ozark. Ozark's not far from Elba or Opp or Florella or Enterprise, all those major metropolitan communities that I'm sure that you know of. But racism was everywhere around me. But then we moved to East Tennessee. It was still there, still embedded in my mother and my father, but they were seeing that the world was changing around them, so they made sure that I got involved in, Little League Baseball, Pee Wee football, those kind of things. And in that setting, I came to know Sammy Simpson and Charles Stewart and Joe Bradley and Tony Johnson, Paul Fall and Leslie Love. All of those were just young black boys in our community, and those young guys touched me deeply. And so much of what I do in my own life is kind of guided by my relationship that I had with those guys and my efforts around racial justice. Now, there were several things that really touched me about all of that growing up in that embedded racism. Well, number one was the use of the N-word. It was a lot. My grandmother would never use the N-word the way that many of us have heard it. She would always use the N-word by spelling it Negra. You've heard that before, but that's the kind of stuff that I grew up in. I also grew up in a context where my uncle forced people of color to order out the back door of his restaurant. And I also remember candidly an experience of my mother telling me I couldn't have James McKinney over to spend the night because he was a young man of color. And if a young man of color comes over and spends the night, then people will be aware of that, and it'll lower the rents and it'll lower the property values in the community. I mean, that was what I grew up with. And these are the things that have put me on my journey to try to deal and arrest that prejudice and racism in my life. And I've carried a personal torch about that all of my years, which led me to find someone in every community that I've ever served, 47 years as a United Methodist serving in the church, but to find someone that I could connect with across color lines. So it led me to Robert Hayes. It led me to Bill Staley. And it led me back in 2016 to see this fellow down here. I knocked on the door and I said, "We're going to be best friends." And he looked at me like I was just clueless, but we're thankful for what God has done. Grateful for that.
Now, that's not what he said. He said, "Larry, the Lord sent me to you."
Well,
and then I said, "Who is this little white?"
Yeah, now that's right. That's right.
Lord sent him to me, but he did send him to me. Thank you, Jeff.
You bet. Well, and God sent Larry to me as well. And the relationship has been deep through the years. We've broken bread in respective homes. We shared our lives together. We've served in the community. We've listened to each other when we were deeply frustrated. We've started some things together. The Martin Luther King celebration here in our community. We've started trips to Montgomery and Selma. We've got us reading books and things like that. So that's all been part and parcel of who I am. It shapes me today. Now, the church that I serve, the Matthews United Methodist Church, has been in our community since 1877, and right now we're in the second location of where we've been. Actually, there were 3 previous settings, but the second location that I'm aware of, because I'm actually in my second time around of serving the Matthews Church. First time it was located, anybody know where COS Kids would be? Any of you know where that is? Well, that's across from the Presbyterian. That is the original Matthews United Methodist Church, in case you didn't know that. And that's where I served late 80s, early 90s, and then was away 25 years in and came back in 2016, served for a second time. And just for you to know that never happens in the United Methodist tradition. Never, ever happens, but somehow it happened to me, and I'm so very grateful for that. Church I served, built 1877, relocated to where we are on South Trade Street in 1993. So we've been on that site for about 31 years now. Our community of faith seeks to be built around making the love of God real in our community, in our region, and in our world. In our church, we want to be known for being a church that is not just in the community, but is for the community. We want to be known more for the things that we're for than what we're against. And those kind of things are at the heart of what it means to be a part of Matthews United Methodist.
And we'll now hear from Pastor Luke Mabry, Senior Pastor, Matthews Presbyterian Church.
How is everyone tonight? Good. Thank you, Larry, for having us, and Tanya always for coming to these, being so faithful. I grew up in a little town called Campobello, South Carolina. Do y'all know where that is? That's sad. It's close to Spartanburg. It's just down I-85 between Spartanburg and Greenville, kind of in the mountains and the foothills. And my family's been there since before there was a Campobello. They've been there forever. And my father just died. He died in February. His name is John Broadus Mabry III. My brother's a fourth. Anybody? Does the name John Broadus ring a bell to anybody? Does it ring a bell to any of y'all? He was a preacher in the late 1800s, a Baptist preacher. In fact, he was the first president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which at the time was at Furman University. I think it moved under his leadership to Louisville. I don't know why or how, but my great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War for the South. He came home, and he was deeply influenced by this famous preacher called John Broadus. So when he had children, he named his first child John Broadus Mabry and called him Broadus. And so my father's a third. My father was the kindest man I've ever known, I think. And he treated everybody the same. I mean, it didn't matter how rich, poor, black, white. He was very outgoing, gregarious, extroverted. He'd talk to you, and everybody loved him. You know, there wasn't much about him not to love. And that had a deep influence on me. He deeply influenced me to treat everybody, regardless of who you are, regardless of your political views, treat them well, and to find the best in them. He was a master at doing that. But one of the great ironies about that, though, is John Broadus, the preacher he was ultimately named for. In one of the books I read, and Chuck doesn't have it, but it's called White Too Long. Have y'all read that? That's about the white church, and it's about how white preachers went out of their way to keep it white, you know. And John Broadus is featured prominently in that book, and he's not featured very well at all. And now that's controversial, but he was a segregationist at the time. And it is kind of ironic that my father, who taught me to treat everybody equally, was named for him. There is a rest of that story, and I'm not going to tell it now. Remind me to tell it before we leave, because it's kind of interesting. But my parents were wonderful parents. They raised me in Campobello, raised me in the church, very active in the church, like Chuck. Race was all around me, but I didn't know it. I went to Wofford College, used to be the home of the Carolina Panthers right now, but it's not now because, anyway, that's a sore subject. But and it was funny, you know, Wofford, there's another book about that Chuck recommended that I read, about Wofford and Furman integrating. And when I went to Wofford, it was probably less than 10% black and 90% white. And it was the most segregated place. It really was. But you know, if you're in the majority like I was, you're just blind to how segregated it was. You know, I mean, that's just life. I didn't even think about it. It's like a fish in water. You know, I mean, you don't pay attention to the water until you're out of the water. And then I went in the Army sent me to college, so I went in the Army for 4 years at Fort Hood, Texas. And I really got to know my soldiers well, many of whom were black, and I heard their stories, and that probably did, my Army experience probably did more to open my eyes to the sin of racism and to my sin of racism. And largely because of that, I felt called to ministry in the church, and so I went to Austin Presbyterian Seminary. I served a little Methodist congregation. That's another story. And then I went over to the dark side, or the light. I don't know, depending on who you ask, but the frozen chosen. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I, like Chuck, this is deeply ironic, but I too was an associate at Matthews Presbyterian before I became senior pastor. I was an associate from 05 to 08. And I'm ashamed to admit this. I really am ashamed. I was here for 3 years. I didn't even know there was a Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church, nor did I really know that there was even a Crestdale community. I never turned right, at that place in Trade Street. I just kept going straight. I didn't have any business down here. And it was only really when I got back I was a pastor at Central Steel Creek Presbyterian Church for about 10 years, and then I came back here in 2018, and the first person who called me was Chuck, or one of the first people who called me, and he welcomed me to the community and said, I really want you to get involved in this, and I have, and it's just been wonderful and life-giving for me and for my church. The Matthews Presbyterian Methodist Baptist were all founded the same year, 1877-ish. I always forget who was founded first. We all have our own journeys, but they're also very similar too, and one of the things I've tried to do, like John, is to get the church and get myself more active in this community. It really was a sin that I was here as an associate pastor 3 years. I didn't even know this place existed. And so I have tried to meet people in the community, get involved in the community, and show up. My mantra for ministry is showing up. If you don't show up, you get an F every time. And if you do show up, you at least get a B+ most of the time. So I'm just trying to show up as best I can and be faithful. I've got 3 children. I have a Julia starting her senior year right now. I'm kind of heartbroken about that. Senior year in high school, so she'll be going off to college next year. And then a 10th grader and an 8th grader, and a wife named Leah. So we're busy, but anyway, that's my story in brief. I'm sticking to it.
Tanya, just a little note. All 4 of these churches were organized before the town of Matthews was chartered. So that's an important little historical
That's a really important point. And I also want to applaud you all for being as transparent as you are, because it's a conversation that you are just letting flow, and a lot of people have a difficult time with that. And as Pastor Mabry, to give him a chance to catch his breath, I'm in charge of keeping them on point, so you can imagine a little pressure here to keep pastors staying within their time limits. And so you've got 2 minutes. We're going to start with you, Pastor Chuck, and then we'll go to Pastor Mabry and come back this way. But talk about Bridge Builders and how it's brought about change in your congregation.
For Pastor Chuck, what you're hearing is we have some difficulty with our sound system. That's because there's a shortage. But we got a video we wanted to show you, and that's why it's popular. We're trying to get it where the volume would come in. So don't pay nobody shooting at us. So.
Right.
Tanya, Matthews has lots of things have occurred within Matthews United Methodist. Of course, our Bridge Builders Fellowship, which has emerged out of this, and which these churches are involved with. So a lot of activities. From fifth Sunday gatherings around lunch to, group studies around books and all of that. So a lot of really positive things. But I want to just share with you kind of a not so positive a response. I remember this. All of you remember the George Floyd tragic death of his life. And I believe that was in June of 2000. And we're in the middle of COVID and all of that. Well, it was Pentecost Sunday in the life of the church, and I remember I was doing a sermon, and I called my Pastor Whitley, and heard him say something, and so I asked him if I could use a quote. Now, I'm going to tell you the end of the story before I tell you the quote, okay? The end of the story is, after I used that quote, by 12:05, I had 10 emails in my box telling me they were so angry with me, and by the end of that evening, we had 10 families that had left the church. So, impact of all of that. So here's what,
Are you saying I ran your members over?
not in the least. I wouldn't dare say that. But I did use this quote, and this is an incredible quote from him. Larry said, Chuck, when white folks say all lives matter, it dilutes the ugly truth that right now black men are dying. Right now, the issue is not all lives, it is black lives. And until black lives matter, white folk have no right to say all lives matter. And then he said, Chuck, white folk, if you know Larry Whitley, you've heard him say this a zillion times. Chuck, white folk have to learn to see through black eyes.
Very powerful. Thank you, Pastor Chuck. Pastor Mabry, can you talk about bridge builders and the changes brought in your congregation?
I don't know how to follow that because that was really good. Churches can be very insular at times. You know, we get worried about our own problems, about paying the light bills, about getting new members, about different little controversies in the church, about children's programming, everything that we do. And then we forget to see that the church is a lot bigger than Matthew's Presbyterian Church, and the church is a lot bigger than the Presbyterian Church. You know, this has opened our eyes up to just how big the church is. I mean, even just me counting these pastors up here in Prince has opened my eyes up, and in turn, I think that's opened the church's eyes up. I mean, it is very easy as a white person to look at the world through white. That's what I did at Wofford. I mean, was there a race problem at Wofford when I was there? No, not for me. I mean, there really wasn't. I mean, ultimately, there was for me, too. I mean, I did not build a lot of great relationships that I should have built, but I didn't see that, you know, and I think this has forced our church and me to see that the church is bigger than our church, and God gives us many different set of eyes to see the world and God's creation, and it has helped broaden what those eyes see. So it's been very broadening for us.
Thank you. And now Pastor Moritzen.
Morning Star has not been actively involved in the bridge builders for very long. We're on the other side of the coin. As we spoke of in February, for our previous community forum, we're doing a program called Coming to the Table, which is a nationwide organization of cross-racial conversation, relationship building, especially between congregations. So Morning Star is tied and working with and building relationship since COVID with Jonesville AME Zion Church, which is a neighboring church a little bit further down Idlewild Road. It's another one of those churches that for 8 years, 9 years, every time I go to the hospital, every time I go into Charlotte, driving by, I know right where it is. I couldn't have told you 3 things about the congregation. But as the Spirit moves, during COVID, we were looking for ways, the Lutheran Church used that time of isolation to try to reach all the way around North Carolina and say, we're doing a book study on, you know, discrimination in housing. We're doing a book study on, we're looking at caste. We're looking at all kinds of different books. I think they did 10 book studies over the course of the isolation of COVID. And that led people to say, what's next? Morning Star, that was coming to the table. And so every 2 weeks, we get together online, do a Zoom meeting, and 1 week it's a conversation amongst the crowd with a topic, and the next time they bring someone in as a guest, or they have a video that's then, discussed and talked about. So it's been really good for us. I know you're thinking 2 minutes, so I'm trying to hurry up on that. I'm going to give a tease. That has led Morning Star, because that's a kind of a closed group. Kind of like your bridge builders, I would make an assumption about the congregations at Mount Moriah and Matthews Methodist. The people who are in it know what's cooking and know what's going on. If you're not involved in that, how do you pass that barrier? For Morning Star, that barrier passed in a way that was completely unexpected for us, and just showed how the Holy Spirit, when your eyes are open, or maybe to use the vision, metaphor, when your prescription changes a little bit, you start seeing different things more clearly. So that'll be my next comment after that.
Thank you, Pastor. Now, Pastor Whitley.
Listen, Pastor said pretty much what I would have said. As I stated to you, I was the first person of color on the town of Matthews in 2015. And I came in with the all-white male board with blue eyes. I came with brown eyes and had some different thoughts, ideas, but there at that time pretty much didn't pay me no attention. He let me talk, but then it was just like, you talk, and then we go right back to what it was. And so I started looking around, and I asked the question. At that time, they didn't have any persons of color that held any high positions in the town of Matthews. And I asked them if they found a person qualified of color, would they hire him? And they didn't answer the question. The assistant town manager, Becky Hawk, had just got there at the same time I was. And she answered, yes, we will. I won't never forget that. But what led into that was to look around and see Martin Luther King was not celebrated here. So my thinking was, all right, Larry, everybody else is not celebrating Martin Luther King. I want Matthews be the first, and we'll kick it off. And little everybody, all the surrounding towns was celebrating Martin Luther King, and Matthews was not. And I was floored. I was coming on the highway patrol in 1975. You can imagine the things that I went through being a state trooper in all-white organization. But it floored me that the town of Matthews did not celebrate Martin Luther King. And so Pastor Chuck and I set out to make that happen. And once I brought it to their attention, the board attention, I asked them, why did they not celebrate Martin Luther King? And the answer to me is, nobody never asked us. Nobody never asked us to celebrate. So then we've been celebrating Martin Luther King, but what Bridge Building brought out of that is all the surrounding churches come together and Martin Luther King, and we celebrate here. And the visiting pastor would bring a message on Martin Luther King. But not only that, we were able to award a person of color, a young person in the Crestdale, Matthew, a scholarship each year. We started off with 1,000, was it Chuck? 1,000, and we went to $2,500, which we would give out to a young person. For the last 2 years, we've been very fortunate to be able to give 2 persons of color scholarship of $2,500, and I just give God praise for that. Thank you. So Bridge Building has brought us together where we come as black and white. When we sit down together, I'll be at the grocery store and Chuck members, hey, Pastor Whitley, and hopefully mine is speaking back to you, Chuck, whenever you're out. Chuck and I like Longhorns, so if you want to have a conversation after church, we at Longhorns every Sunday. But nevertheless, truly, we are better today than we were yesterday. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. So we're going to get to questions in just a moment. I've got one more question for the panel, so kind of keep in mind we're going to open it up for your questions and comments. And I'll start with Pastor Moritzen. If you would talk about words of encouragement that you would give to other church denominations about the benefits of bridge building, and I don't know if you want to continue to share what you wanted to throw in.
That's really a word of encouragement for us as we got into the coming to the table relationship with our siblings at Jonesville. That gave us reason and just cause to have our eyes open other ways as well, partially to relationships that we have or don't have on a congregational level or on a personal level. What it did was coming to the table is a little bit like the bridge builders. If you're in it, you know what's cooking. But if you're not a part of it, you think you heard something. But that's kind of what it is. But what happened at Morning Star, we started to talk more and more about relationships that aren't in this room. You know, when you gather as a worshiping community, what are the relationships that aren't happening? On a personal level, that could be on a community level, on a congregational level. For Morning Star, the Holy Spirit decided to be creative, and she started working on us for it, both cross-racially, but also in terms of other ways to connect with our community. Morning Star, from 2022 to 2023, began a process to become a reconciling congregation, which means every church will say all are welcome. But if you are a blended family, racially blended, if you're a same-sex couple with children, if you are a single mother with 2 or 3 children, reception, let's say, your reception at any given church might be a hit or miss affair. I think we can agree on that. That is part of something that we should be convicted by. Morning Star realized that in order to be a place where all are welcome, you have to work on yourself and your own congregation first. And we spent a year in discernment, in prayer, in education, in Bible study, looking at what it means to truly be Christ-like in our welcome. Now that goes across all color lines, all lines of political choice, of sexual orientation, of gender identity, and all those things. See, we've gotten pretty far off of coming to the table or bridge builders, haven't we? But that's because we were a little bit more open to that opportunity. So for a year we studied and we took a congregational vote. Do we wish to say we understand what it means to be welcoming to all people, to be hospitable to people in every situation of life? And the congregation overwhelmingly voted yes. And so when we say on our website, you are welcome if you are, you know, no matter what language you are speaking at your kitchen table, no matter what your church experience has been, no matter what you love, or your marital status, or lack thereof, or whatever it might be. And we've got a long list on our website. If you want to check it out, it's kind of fun. But now all of a sudden, because we were open to having conversation with folks we weren't already talking to actively, it meant that we were more aware about other ways that we could open ourselves up to the community. And it was never a membership thing. It was not a grab for more bodies. It was, are we being Christ-like in our welcome beyond what we think? Because everybody says, my church is great. But do you have to be there 12 years before it becomes great? Do you have to know the lady that makes the coffee, or the fellow that parks the car, or do you have to know all the insiders before it becomes great? Or can I walk in those doors and say, I feel the Spirit of God in this place, and they don't know my name? That's the change that Morning Star's gone through. And I would encourage all congregations to let the Spirit move, maybe in ways that you hadn't planned on 8 months ago. We still don't know how this is going to go, but this past weekend, we couldn't be at Hug a Cop here at Mount Moriah because Morning Star one of the oldest Lutheran congregations in the North Carolina Synod was at the Pride Weekend. Tell me 10, 15 years ago, Pride Weekend, handing out 3,000 buttons and we gave out Holy Communion during Pride to more than 100 individuals. We weren't proselytizing. We had it there, and people who had been hurt by church and maybe pushed away from church throughout their lives saw that and said, "Is that communion?" We said, "Yes, it is. And it's here if you'd like it." We had more than 100 people come, one by one, to take Holy Communion during Pride Weekend. I don't know how it is in all your denominations, but in the Lutheran Church, far fewer than 100 people is the average of a Lutheran congregation in the United States. We had more people communion at Pride than the average Lutheran church. I've had to preach on that because that was after service on Sunday. But it'll preach because I think the Spirit was there. Sorry, that's where I want to go.
Thanks for sharing. Pastor Whitley, if you could answer some words of encouragement to give the other denominations.
One of the word of encouragement I would give to other congregation is relationship. And what I've learned in the 8 years that we've been doing this is that relationship is so important for the pastors and for the congregation to go out and break bread together with different people. And I grew up in a family of 8 siblings and mom and dad, and my mom was
Thank you. Pastor Chuck, if you would share some words of encouragement.
Yes. A little bit different relationship. One of the things that I think that Bridge Builders has done in the community of faith in which I've served is the deep dive into history. So many of our conversations around racial justice, they're polarized, they're fractured, and what I realized, and especially in the last 10 years here in this community, is that I didn't know the history. I didn't know actually what happened in this country, because when I reflect back, the true evil of American slavery was not involuntary servitude or forced labor, and it wasn't the bondage, because the real evil of slavery was the ideology that it all created, that black people were less deserving, less worthy, less human, less evolved. And if you don't understand that that's the true problem of slavery, then it becomes easier to understand how we don't really end slavery with the passage of the 13th Amendment. I mean, in 1865, my view is that slavery doesn't end. It just evolved into something else. And because we never deal with the fundamental character that made enslavement so horrific, shall I say it, which is the ideology of white supremacy. And friends, once you understand that, and that's what this deep dive in history, at least for me over the last 10 years, and my friend Luke has been very helpful within some of that for me, is that you continue to see that legacy play out in the exclusion of black people from jobs in the North or in the West, way back in the 1950s when banks didn't give black people mortgage loans, that they didn't help veterans who are black move into the middle class. And you begin to see that in the 70s and 80s when we declared the war on drugs. And who did we target? We targeted the black community. And you see it in the ways that even police violence can manifest itself. And by the way, friends, what we started 9 years ago, this emphasis that we call Hug a Cop, friends, that is the opportunity for us to establish credibility among law enforcement. And we've been doing that year after year after year to say thank you for their service. And there are always opportunities that come around that we have to speak to issues around that as well. So my point is, the bridge building, especially in the context of our setting, is taking this deep dive into history, and it has been so very, very helpful for us to get our hands around those things.
Before I gave a word of encouragement, I would give a word of caution that, I mean, Chuck has already mentioned this, but when you speak about hard issues from the pulpit, a lot of people will tell you, well, that's political, we're not supposed to talk about politics in the pulpit or whatever. I mean, it's costly, you know. That's what I do. I mean, I'll read these. I don't know if you heard the story of, who's the guy who was the Southern Baptist, you know who I'm talking about. No, I'll think out there in a minute. No, this guy was preaching a sermon about Jesus said, love your enemies and all this stuff. And so he talked about how we're supposed to love our enemies. And somebody came out the back and said, that's weak. It's weak stuff. Stupid. Weak. And he said, I blame Jesus. You know, I mean, he's the one who told us this. This is a direct quote that I gave you to turn the other cheek and love your enemies. Sorry. I mean, if you don't like that, blame Jesus. Yeah, but preaching the gospel is costly. I mean, you make people upset, and sometimes you get it wrong, but it takes courage to preach the gospel. It takes courage to talk about race, and it's easier not to. That's why a lot of churches don't. So I would count the cost before you do it, and know that it's going to cost you something. But also know that the relationships that you build are just spectacular. That in my last church, Steel Creek it's a old Presbyterian community, and there are 5 churches, 3 white churches and 2 black churches that are all Presbyterian, that are all ancient. You know, they've been around since 1770 or something like that. And we would do a lot of stuff together. We would have Lenten services together, for example. We would have, we did Room in the Inn together. You know, we would do Room in the Inn at our church and then their church. And we got to know one another. So when somebody in my congregation died, a lot of people from Mount Olive would come to the funeral, you know, because they knew. I mean, that is the church at its best. You know, I remember one time I tried to sneak into revival service at Mount Olive Presbyterian Church because it was a long day at work, and I just kind of wanted to come late and leave kind of early because I had young kids at the time. And so I went back there, and the preacher and everybody was like, you're coming right down here, buddy, and we're going to welcome you. And that was a beautiful, beautiful thing that I continue to deeply cherish. What we did not do there that we do here is we did not dive deep into the issues of race, and I appreciate us diving deep. And it's not just, it is race, but it's also how race interacts with other things like economics or like education. Housing, for example, is one. Gun control, all that stuff. Law enforcement that interacts with all sorts of things like that. And that makes it, ultimately, my word of encouragement is it makes us faithful, that we are doing what God has called us to do. These things, whatever the issues are, affect real people's lives. And when you get to know them, you see that, and how can you not talk about it? You must talk about it. So it's hard. You get some nasty emails sometimes. That's not fun, but it's faithful.
Very good. So thank you all for answering those questions, and we're pretty much on schedule on time, so you've done an excellent job. We'll now open it up for questions. You've heard from our pastors, our distinguished panel here, and so now we'd like to hear from you. I know you all have some questions about race relations and how they've been able to navigate this. Okay, there's a mic here. If you would make your way to the center by the podium so that everyone can hear, and I believe some people are possibly listening online as well, so thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And I have a somewhat odd question, but, my name is Whit Diaz. I belong right here at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church, where Dr. Larry Whitley is my pastor. There's a lot. Personally, I've known Jesus Christ as my Savior for 47 years now, and I've always been a student of history and the Bible, and I like to see how it works together as far as how we conduct ourselves as a church. With that being said, currently in our culture, there's a lot of talk about white privilege, and I would like to hear your thoughts along those lines, and biblically your thoughts along those lines of white privilege.
I'll give it a little stab. Congregationally speaking, conversations about white privilege, I think as Luke was just talking about, when you have relationship, you have investment. Conversations of white privilege, I'll speak for Morningstar, started to become less of an abstract thing when we would have families. Grandma and Grandpa go to Morningstar. Their children grew up at Morningstar, and I've been there long enough that I could have baptized them. I might have probably confirmed them. I probably sent them off into the world. And now maybe they found somebody that they want to spend their life with. And so now perhaps we've got a mixed-race couple that are now raising their family. So now I've got Grandma and Grandpa at church, and now they're looking at their kindergarten grandchild, and they're wondering, who's going to have that talk? It can't be me because I don't understand that talk, says the white grandparent. But all of a sudden they know for their grandchild that has to be done. That's the kind of experience that has opened up much of this type of reality, because this is my grandchild, and I will step in front of a bus for my grandchild. And now it is real. And so white privilege becomes clear to many people when there is literally a threat, usually someone they love. As Luke was saying, if it's not a problem, you kind of assume it's not a problem for most people. But education has been a big part of it. When our national youth gathering for the Lutheran Church was down in New Orleans, and we talked about, first time we went down was after Katrina. After Katrina. First major group that used the Superdome after it was the horror that it was during Katrina and the aftermath. And then we talked to the youth, the teenagers, 30,000 teenagers, talking about what's it like when your home is gone and you have nothing. And our kids would say, well, what about insurance? But if you've been renting for 30 years, what do you have? You know, we talked about here in Charlotte, redlining. You know, when your parents decide they want to move out of their house, they get to sell that house and take that money elsewhere. Or when they pass away, it gets passed on. All of a sudden, our kids are learning things. It had white privilege. I think it can't be threatened out of people, but it can be taught. That way, you're also seeing the reality, and then you're aware of, again, what else is happening to people that are not. I don't know that's a response, but at least for us, the movement through the generations has given us more and more reason, cause, and fulfillment of understanding that truth. Not always a happy thing, but it's been important.
I think for me, one of the strongest examples in all of Holy Scripture is the Pentecost story. Tongues of fire resting on the disciples, wind of the Spirit blowing through the upper room, but oftentimes I think we miss the really clear mandate for racial and ethnic inclusivity inherent in that story. You may remember verse 5 of Acts chapter 2, that city was full of folks from every nation on the earth, all of whom were able to hear the good news in their native languages. And I've often wondered if what took place there was a, if you will, the miracle rather than the miracle of the tongue, maybe the miracle of the year. I mean, did the Holy Spirit intercede and interpret? Folks could hear that in their own language, and you remember they and so the Scripture says the Parthians and the Medes and the Elamites and the residents of Mesopotamia and Judea, all of that, right? Acts chapter 2. But either way, this is not so much, I think, speaking in a spiritual language. This is about Jesus overcoming barriers of race and ethnicity and nationality and language and culture. I think that is the Pentecost that we need to hear. I mean, that is the Bible right there. When we see white privilege shielding so many of us from the harsh realities of geographic divisions and divisions that keep us cloistered in our affluent and oftentimes gated communities, what do we need? We need Pentecost. So, throw a little Bible there at you. Okay.
I can add a little bit to that. I probably can't add to it, but about a year ago, I had one of my girls, I've got two girls, and one of their friends' mother texted me on a Sunday morning to pray for Kate. She said, please pray for Kate, which was kind of weird. And because I knew this family very well, but I didn't know them so well, they would text me on a Sunday morning and say, pray for Kate. So I thought maybe, she was depressed, her boyfriend dumped her or something. So I said, well, yeah, I'll pray for Kate. You tell me what I need to pray for Kate about. And so she called me. Kate was just diagnosed with cancer. She was 16 at the time. Well, privilege for me is not having to worry about that. I mean, 48 years old, I'm healthy. My children are healthy. We've never, ever had to worry about cancer. Not with me, not with my wife, not with my children. That doesn't mean cancer doesn't exist, though. It absolutely exists. And needless to say, my friend has thought about cancer a whole lot ever since then. And it breaks my heart to say that she struggled with that cancer for a year and she died Saturday. And it's utterly tragic. In fact, that's why I'm checking my phone, because that's where my kids are. I mean, they're at a vigil for her. It is utterly, it has broken my heart. Like, I can't even talk about it without getting choked up. She was a sweet, beautiful girl, taken away. She should be starting her senior year today, you know, and her visitation's tomorrow. It's just crushing. And issues of race have landed countless black people the same. And I mean, the way this country is treated, race is, in fact, a cancer. And just because it hadn't affected me, when actually it has, doesn't mean it doesn't affect others. The privilege is, I don't have to think about it, as a white guy. But that's not true for so many of my black brothers and sisters. I mean, it's a major issue in your life. And you have to talk to your children about it. I don't have to talk to mine about it. You know, I mean, that's the privilege. When I read the Bible, God came into the world in Jesus Christ as one on the other side of the tracks. I mean, how do you read the Christmas story? Where they're having to go to Egypt, and then they're constantly on. But first they have to go down to go down to Bethlehem. They live in Nazareth, and that's like a 90-mile trek, you know, and she's got to make that 8 months pregnant. That's not a pleasant trip, you know. And then you have to flee to Egypt, according to then you got to come back. And I remember I saw a picture of this immigrant family that was a poor mother, and she was holding her little 3-year-old. And he's a 3, he wants to play, he's got a little toy, you know. And they have come thousands and thousands of miles. And there's a ICE agent, and I'm not throwing stones at ICE agents. I mean, the ICE agent has his arms crossed. It's just a day at work. And meanwhile, this poor woman doesn't know what's going to happen. Is she going to be sent back? Is she going to be separated from him? That we did that as a country. I mean, how do you look at that picture and not see, my God, that's Joseph, that's Mary and Jesus. I mean it. You know, I mean, so when you read the Bible, these issues become, it's all over. You can't read the Bible honestly and not read race into it, to me. It's interesting because I grew up in a church and in a culture that said we were post-racist. And then I started paying attention, and for the very first time in my life, I read the dang Bible, you know, and it was like, wait, hold on, it's all over the place, you know. How can you ignore it? Anyway, that's my take.
When I think about white privilege, it brings me back to our veterans, and they got a GI Bill was afforded to majority of white folks, but the black soldiers weren't able to use that, and then to be able to purchase white people were able to freely, they didn't really have to ask. They just went to the bank and they knew they were a veteran and gave, but then black people could not be able. And all of us know that your step to financial wealth is to own your home. And so I hear white privilege, that's what come to my mind, and know that was alive and well. As I share with you, I come from a beginning back in it's called Zebulon, North Carolina. We're east, about 20 miles east of Raleigh. And my mom was sharecroppers. And we worked for Mr. Lemmy Massey, who owns our home, the land that we were living in. Mr. Massey got in, this was in 1945. Mr. Lemmy Massey got in some financial trouble, and he had to sell 88 acres of his land. And so he put it for sale, and Mr. Fred Alford was like the Hatfields and the McCoy, was going to buy the 88 Mr. Massey. Well, Mr. Massey did not want the offers to buy land, so he carried my father in 1945 to the bank, purchased 88 acres. He co-signed for my father for $10,000 on the premises that when he got on feet, he would buy it back. Well, that never happened. So in 1945, my father was one of the first black men to own 88 acres of house. He was working and farming, very little education, and didn't know nothing really about farming. So you can imagine with a mule and plow, and we started off, and so many times we spent so much. At the end of the year, only get $1,500 for the whole year. But that's how we came to receive our 88 acres. It was 8 of us, and my father and mother sent all 8 of us to college. He had a 3rd grade education, and my mama had a 10th grade. But they knew how important it was to go to college, and so they sold the rest of the farm on the backside, sent us all to school, and they were left with 30-some acres. And I'm proud today that I own 42 acres of that 30 now farm back home and carrying on my father.
Thank you for that. I think I saw another question in the back. If you want, yes. Okay. And if I could just interject so that you are aware, we do have a video. So we probably got about 5 to 7 minutes to answer that. And thank you for that question.
That's us getting together. We getting together regularly. And to be honest, there are many more churches in Matthews than 4. You knew that. But there's always, in this case, when it comes to the pastor, a smaller group of kind of core folks who get together, and I safe to say this is probably pretty indicative of that regular group. After we're done talking about how hard-headed our congregations are, no, I'm just kidding. But when it comes down to doing something new, it reminds me of when my kids were teens. When you tell your teenager it's time to do something, or it'd be good, you need to do this, their first reaction is usually heels down, rolling eyes, whatever it is. The best kind of relationship experiences that my congregation has had have been organic and have been simply through people are already passionate about. A couple years ago, our congregation started and opened up a community nonprofit art gallery. And after we had like our the community forum at Morningstar, a couple people went down, checked out, saw it. So now they're going back to their congregations, and all of a sudden, Jonesville Pastor Gadsden is calling and saying, we heard about your art gallery. I couldn't see it. Can we bring some of our folks down after Sunday service, and can you open it up for us and show us your gallery? All of a sudden, there's interest, and now we're there. My curators, my staff, whoever's there, now we're seeing faces again for the second time in a short while. So now when we see each other again, when it's time to do, Christmas is coming around, we're going to do Christmas carols together, which we do. All of a sudden, because everybody loves to sing Christmas carols, and there's always food involved. That helps too. Do things that are already passionate for people. And I think that word of encouragement, you start with something brand new out of the box and say, here's the thing that will help us. It very well might. But I think it's use the gifts you've already got, use those on-ramps to relationships that you already have. Eating, perfect for everybody. Eating fits everybody. But that we do get together and we do appreciate that on a personal level. I mean, I do. I appreciate each of these fellows and the other congregations also. It means a lot to me in my own ministry. But when it comes to building relationships, yeah, I think organic is the way to go, and the things that you're already have, softball, Panthers, or whatever, doesn't matter.
Joe, one of the things that I saw in the notes related to the last Bridge Builders meeting was there seemed to be a little bit of a kind of a fire under the reemerging with the peace meals. Many of you participated in that. A number of families that did, but that's linking a family of color with a white family and sharing in a meal in one home, sharing in a meal in another home, and then doing something publicly together. There's been kind of maybe a rise of some interest in doing that. That's completely all about the building of relationships. Yeah, so other opportunities that are emerging for us, it would be Thanksgiving is coming up, so we've been doing a Thanksgiving service together, all of our churches. This time we're gathering at the Morningstar Lutheran Church, 5 o'clock on the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Again, an opportunity to connect after the worship service, share time together, making connections. So we're looking for those kind of real opportunities where we can do that, and hopefully we'll find some interest in peace meals, other things like that we're doing.
Okay, Pastor Chuck, now we're slated for the video, the mile, and I don't know if anyone's doing the introduction or we're just going to roll right into it.
Yes. Unfortunately, the video it will not be able to show tonight. It works, but we can't, as you heard the popping, we can't get the volume. But it's a video of myself and Pastor Chuck made about 2 years ago, Chuck, maybe 3. What happens in this video is that I get an opportunity to go and walk in Chuck's community, and he get an opportunity to come and walk Crestdale community. And between the two, community gain so much different insight to the congregations, and then come back here and Pastor Chuck and I talk about bridge building and the things that had kept us apart for so many years. And I'm so sorry that I wanted to show it to you, and I thought you would. It's about 16 minutes, and hopefully when we get another opportunity, we come together, get it and show it at some other time. But Ms. Tanya, that's it. And if we don't want to prolong anybody, go ahead. Go ahead, Chuck.
We can, I'd love for you to reach out to me, and I can send you the link if you'd like to see it. Chuck at matthewsumc.org. If you'd like to see it, it's well done. It's done by a community organization called Silent Images, and they do really, really good work.
So maybe without giving it all away, the two of you, could you give one thing, one takeaway that you got from that experience, Pastor Chuck and Pastor Whitley? Is that a tough one?
No, I don't think it is. I think that a big takeaway, it makes me giggle, but in both of our communities, me walking the streets of Crestdale and my dear friend Pastor Whitley walking the streets of the community that made our people living in the community very uncomfortable. Seriously. In my community, people are calling each other, well, what's that going on out there? And all of that. People very uncomfortable. And then, and I even got scolded by a woman right here in the Crestdale community for, well, what are you doing out here? So, you know, it just, you were a little bit out of context for people. And in some ways that kind of make you giggle, but in other ways it makes us very sad, doesn't it?
Everybody knows that the best way to have people come into a congregation, come into a church community, is to be invited by someone trust and love. You know, if I tell Larry, you would be welcome to the congregation, I would love for you to worship with me. He's going to hear that differently than if he gets a postcard in the mail that just says, come to our church. I think when it comes to relationships across racial lines, denominational lines, and all the rest, if someone you trust, and you might be that someone that someone else trusts, says, come with me to Bridge Builders, or come with me, I'm going to go visit my friends at Mount Moriah on Sunday. You've not been, but I have. And it's a wonderful way to spend time in worship with the community. All of a sudden, that's an invitation that means something, as opposed to 9 out of 10 dentists say, you know, this is, my friend says, this is important. It also shows that building these relationships is important to us. All of a sudden, you become the example for someone else. And that's pretty powerful stuff. Just adding that.
Pastor Whitley, one takeaway?
Yeah, one takeaway that I've gained is that I'm so proud to be a part of Matthews and where we are today and where we have evolved in the time of my pastor and Pastor Chuck, Luke, and John as we are coming together now. And truly, the four pastors here with some others understand we get it, and we carry it back to our congregation, and they get it, and they strong relationship with other churches. I rarely see. I know Sister Adams and Deacon Adams, who are not able to get out now, but they had great friends at Pastor Church, are very close, along with several others in different churches. But it bonds us together. The way is relationship. We have bonded and made relationship, and we don't see each other when we meet each other. It's black and white. But I see my friend, and we carry a relationship. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's very powerful, especially when we see so much division, that you all continue to build unity in the community. Since we don't have the video, did we have any more questions? We wanted to make sure that we allow questions.
The video not working is a sign. As I was saying, video doesn't work, then I'll ask the question. But my name is Sarah, and I am a member at Crestdale. Pastor Morrison, do you have a Russian outreach at your church? I have some Ukrainian friends that speak Russian and all of that. I'm trying to connect them. Everybody is somebody. They're Russians.
Yes, there's quite a large Russian community in the Matthews area. There was a congregation called City Walls.
Okay.
City Walls is a Russian and Ukrainian congregation. They had been meeting at the chapel, the little white chapel that was Morningstar's building. But City Walls is the name of that church. There's also a Ukrainian congregation. There might be Russians as well, a little bit out on Idlewild Road from the traffic circle. Yes, it's on the right-hand side. They got a big front yard. It's a lower-looking building, but that's another either Russian and or Ukrainian congregation. But they're both very active.
Thank you very much.
The City Walls currently meets at Morningstar Presbyterian Church on Sunday afternoons. So that's where they meet. Morningstar Press, Sunday. Yeah. The reason why you didn't ask, but I'll say, the reason why City Walls is no longer meeting in a chapel is because the North Carolina Synod and our larger denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, has seen an influx of Arabic-speaking Christians in the Charlotte area. From New Jersey, Baltimore, New York, bringing their professions down to Charlotte for the cheaper cost of living. And our church has said, is there a congregation in the Charlotte area that would be willing to host Arabic-speaking Christian community? And gratefully, because of a lot of the work that we've done in this regard, Morning was named a congregation that maybe folks should talk to. And you know what our council said? You mean we could host? We'll just host? And people love that idea, because it was, again, back to that: how do you welcome your neighbor? How do you be at least hospitable or open to a possible relationship? We hope it'll happen, but that came out of a lot of this discernment when it came across cross-racial. Now we're talking, because in today's world, Arabic equals a lot of things, and Arabic does not equal a lot of wonderful things in American society. But when you talk about these are the oldest Christians we've got, how do we provide a space for them? So, but yes, the Russian community is quite busy, and City Walls Church is a good one to check out.
Thank you
They're
so
online.
much. Thank you. And I just wanted to say I'm so grateful for this whole forum, the Bridge Builders, and I honor you all for holding the light, because I just think that the congregations get it from the teaching priest, their mentality, how they grow in this thing called race. It comes from the pulpit, and thank you so much. One other thing while I'm up, Pastor Mayberry, and I hesitate to even bring this up, but because we're all family. When you opened, you said that in your military experience, you mentioned my soldiers. And I want to share with you that checked my spirit. Because when white people refer to black people, and it just may be me, when you say it brings me to that slave mentality. And I'm just sharing that with us, because as a black person, when you say my housekeeper, my maid, it puts a check in my spirit. And I say that for our edification, that as a black person, I perceive when a white person refers to me as my, or I get something from that. So I share that with you to say it may be, and I may be being oversensitive, and I try to keep my mentality in a place that is not easily offended. According to Psalm 119, verse 165, try not to get offended. But when words, those are code words for me as a black person to say my or me. And
So a question, or you just want to share that comment?
just wanted to share it amongst family.
All right. Thank you. So did you want to ask another question, sir? We appreciate you both for sharing. And Pastor, I don't know if you want to respond or we'll move on. Any other questions? Because I would say as well, with military in my family, you know, when you're going to combat or when you're dealing with a situation, we all in. And so certainly, I think we have another question over here. If you'd like to stand.
Good evening. My name is Molly Clark, and I'm a member here at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church, where Pastor Whitley is my pastor. First, I want to thank all of you as well for what you are doing, the bridge building. I know as just a citizen of the country, I think everyone should be making attempts to make things better so we can leave a better world than we found. I transferred to North Carolina, my husband and I, and we have some children and grandchildren in the area a few years ago. And I'll try to be brief, but I do have a question at the end of my saying what I'm going to say.
So we'll give you, because we got 8:45 where we're going to start to get final comments. So if you think you can do it in about 3 minutes, would that work?
Okay. I'm a born-again Christian, and I'll just fast forward to my question. I was to a conference a few years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, where Billy Graham's daughter, Ann Graham, was our speaker, and she did an awesome job, and there were thousands of people there. A few people were there that looked like me, and when we did break for the session, I was so appalled with how little they applauded her for what she was saying. And she was speaking on love. And she said, if you cannot love one another, you are not a child of the living God. You are God's creation. that was one of the things that she said. And she said, you must be able to love the least of them, which was one of the things that really touched me and brought me to this church. Because you get a sermon, whether our pastor preaches or whomever, or if no one preaches, because we always end with a little session on love and truth and honor. And my question is this. At that session with Ann Graham, when we mingled, I mingled with people. I've always brought up in a church, I guess you could say black church, but people looked like you guys. And, one thing about the black community, we come in all shades. And there were so many blonde, blue-eyed people in the church and, in the schools. So my parents, like the bubble you talked about, I thought about me, the fishbowl. I didn't realize the racism that was taking place in Tennessee. My parents moved north when I was in my late teens. The Northerners told us what was going on in the South. But my question is this. When Ann Graham taught on love and her father's message, many of the people that I mingled with, I asked them, why were you guys so stiff? When she spoke on you must love, you must be concerned about your brother. And I heard from more than one, we no longer believe that gospel. We would not have come here if we had known she was preaching her daddy's gospel. So my question is, why are so many people now not believing the gospel that Billy Graham preached? If you could just touch on where were they coming from when they said, we no longer believe that stuff? And they were there as a Christian conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because it's hard to love, it's, if I love you, I can't say that your pain is not my problem. I don't get to say that, and that's hard to do. Love demands, love is love. Look at that cross. It's costly. Love is costly, right? And I think we've all. It's very easy to make God look like an old white guy like me, if you're not real careful. But then you read the Bible and you see that's not the case. We can make our religion into an idol. But I think when we're called to love one another, that's difficult to do. I don't know. But we are pretty good at making idols, are we not? We do that. So I think sometimes we've all done that. That'd be my quick.
Well, we certainly appreciate your questions, and we certainly appreciate you all staying with us throughout the evening, and hopefully you've gotten some really valuable information as we continue. I always say this effort, these meetings, Matthews is like the poster child, and I wish that more ministries would come together and do so much more of this, especially in a time like this, as we continue to be about God's work in the community. Pastor Chuck now is going to come forward for final remarks. I'm not sure if each pastor would like to give an outro as well. I would just like to say you can find me on Praise 100.9, which is a 24-hour gospel station, and I'd love for you to tune in, especially on Saturdays from 10 until 2. Thank you.
Tanya, thanks so much for being with us 15 times. We're very grateful for that. Yeah. Well, you're ready to go, and again, so grateful for your presence with us tonight and sharing in this. It's just one of those things that we feel so strongly about, that we've got to continue to make sure that we show up around racial justice right here in Matthews. So help us do that. We know that September the 10th, something's coming up at the Friendship Church. I think it's, John, what is that? It's related to the redress movement, and it's related to... Yeah. Thank you so much, Nana, for doing that. And then Thanksgiving, we gather at with our Lutheran friends. We're going to share in Holy Communion together. It'll be a beautiful, beautiful evening for us. And then you can put on your calendar for our next one of these, February the 18th. And that's going to be at the Matthews United Methodist Church. So, everybody ready to stand and pray together? Let's do that. God, we give you thanks for allowing us to be here tonight with these amazing persons. They've been so patient with us as we've talked about these issues and how they've affected this community. We're grateful that Pastor Whitley has the vision that we are better today than we were yesterday. We're grateful that he acknowledges that and that we're all a part of helping our community to be better. May we have the vision, oh God, for amazing things to occur within this setting, in this context, and this community where we are a reconciled people. And for this we give you thanks. Through Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. Go in peace, everybody. May the